There is something that lives quietly inside the chest of almost every person who has ever loved and lost. It does not always come out loud. Sometimes it whispers in the middle of the night when the room feels too big and the heart feels too small. Sometimes it rises before the eyes even open, a dull ache that arrives before consciousness fully settles in. And sometimes it comes in the strangest moments, in the middle of a laugh, in the middle of a song, in the middle of a perfectly ordinary Tuesday, and it stops everything cold. That something is not just grief. It is deeper than grief. It is the soul trying to make sense of a love that was real, that was given with everything, that was prayed over and fought for and held on to with both hands, and still did not stay. The heart that is loved and lost does not just hurt. It searches. It turns inward and begins to look for meaning in the silence that the other person left behind. It replays conversations, revisits moments, holds on to fragments of what used to be whole. And somewhere in that searching, somewhere in that quiet, desperate reaching for understanding, something begins to stir. Not answers, not yet, but the beginning of something. The first tender thread of a healing that the heart does not yet know is already underway. And here is what needs to be said to every heart that is still in that silence, still in that searching, still trying to make sense of a love that ended before it felt finished. The pain is not wasted. The love was not wasted. The prayers were not wasted. Every single thing that was poured into that relationship, every vulnerable moment, every sacrifice, every hope that was attached to that person, none of it disappeared into nothing. None of it was thrown away. God does not work that way. He has never worked that way. And the season that was walked through, as dark and disorienting as it was not a mistake. It was a mercy that did not feel like one in the moment, perhaps does not fully feel like one even now. But a mercy nonetheless, designed by a love that sees further than any human heart is capable of seeing. God sees time in a way that no human being is capable of. Every person on this earth is trapped inside moments, experiencing life one breath, one heartbeat, one conversation at a time. There is no seeing around corners. There is no standing outside the story and reading the chapters that have not yet been lived. The heart that is in the middle of grief cannot see past the grief. The heart that is in the middle of loss cannot see what is being built inside the loss. It can only feel the weight of it. It can only carry the ache of it from one day to the next, hoping that eventually the weight will lift, that eventually the ache will soften, that eventually the morning will come when waking up does not feel like the first assault of a long and difficult day. But God stands outside of time entirely. He sees the beginning and the middle and the end of every single story before a single chapter has been lived. He sees the version of a person before the heartbreak and after it. He sees who they are in the middle of the grief and who they will become when the grief has done its work. He sees the love that is still coming, the one that is being shaped and prepared even now, even in this season that feels like nothing but loss. He sees it all simultaneously, with perfect knowledge and perfect love. And a God who sees that way, who holds that kind of complete and perfect view, does not allow pain without purpose. He does not allow a heart to be broken carelessly. He does not stand at a distance while his children suffer and call it indifference. Every wound he allows has something inside of it. Every broken season is carrying something that the comfortable seasons could never produce. That is the foundation on which everything else rests. God does not waste wounds. He never has and he never will. Deuteronomy chapter 8 verse 2 carries something remarkable inside it, something that tends to land differently when it is read by someone who has been through the wilderness rather than someone who is simply studying it academically. God led his people through the wilderness to humble them, to test them, to know what was in their hearts. The wilderness was not punishment, it was not abandonment, it was not God looking away while his people suffered. It was revelation. God was drawing something out of his people in that barren, difficult place that the comfort and abundance of Egypt could never have drawn out. There are things the soul only discovers about itself when it has been stripped of everything it was leaning on. There are depths of dependence, depths of authentic faith, depths of genuine trust that simply cannot be reached when life is smooth and predictable and full. Those depths only become accessible when the thing a person was most certain they could not live without is removed, and they discover, to their own astonishment, that they are still breathing, that God is still there, that something inside them is stronger and more resilient and more deeply rooted than they ever had occasion to know before. For a great many people, the wilderness was not a landscape. The wilderness was a relationship. It was a person. It was that specific connection that felt like home, that felt like the answer to years of quiet longing, that felt like God had finally said yes to the prayer that had been carried for so long. And into that relationship everything was poured. Time and emotion and vulnerability and faith, and the particular kind of hope that comes when a person finally believes they have found where they belong. And then it did not hold. And the unraveling of it, whether it happened slowly or all at once, whether it came with explanation or without it, whether the departure was chosen or forced, felt like a kind of dying that is almost impossible to describe to someone who has not lived it. The body keeps functioning. The world keeps moving. People around keep laughing and working and going about their days. But something inside is standing in rubble, trying to remember how to breathe normally, trying to understand how something that felt so right became something that hurt so much. And through all of it, through every single difficult moment of that wilderness, something was being done in the spirit that no comfortable season could have accomplished. God was working, quietly, carefully, with infinite patience and infinite love. He was working. Not in spite of the pain, but through it. Many people come into love carrying wounds they have never examined. Wounds from childhood, from early relationships, from years of feeling unseen or unvalued or not quite enough. Wounds from fathers who were absent or critical, from mothers who were overwhelmed or unavailable, from friendships that betrayed, and from experiences that taught the heart early that love, conditional, that affection must be earned, that belonging is always slightly uncertain. These wounds do not announce themselves. They do not arrive at the beginning of a relationship and say, "Here is what I will cost you." They move quietly beneath the surface, shaping choices, influencing attractions, creating in a person a pull toward what is familiar even when familiar means painful. A person carrying those wounds can love with complete sincerity. They can give generously and pray faithfully, and commit wholeheartedly, and still be choosing at a level below full conscious awareness, a dynamic that mirrors what they have always known, not because they are foolish, not because they lack discernment, but because the wounds have not yet been seen clearly enough to be healed, and unhealed wounds tend to repeat themselves until something happens that makes them impossible to ignore. The wrong relationship has a way of making them impossible to ignore, because the wrong person does not just break the heart. They reveal what was already broken inside it. They find the place of deepest insecurity and, simply by being who they are, by their inconsistency or their emotional unavailability or their conditional affection or their departure, they illuminate that place in a way that can no longer be looked away from. The wound that was invisible becomes visible. The fracture that was quietly there all along suddenly cannot be denied. And standing in front of that truth, standing in front of the real condition of the heart, is one of the most difficult and most necessary experiences a person can have. Because a wound that cannot be seen cannot be healed. A fracture that has never been acknowledged cannot be restored. A pattern that has never been named cannot be broken. And God, whose love is always working toward wholeness and never away from it, sometimes allows a relationship to do the painful and precise work of making the invisible visible. Not to humiliate, not to punish, not to prove that the person is broken beyond repair, but because he loves too completely to allow his children to carry invisible fractures into the future he has prepared for them. Because what he has planned requires wholeness, and wholeness sometimes begins with a breaking open. Romans chapter 8 verse 28 is one of those scriptures that gets quoted so frequently it can lose its weight. All things work together for good, for those who love God and are called according to his purpose. All things. Not the beautiful things, not the things that make obvious sense, not the seasons of answered prayer and clear direction and felt presence. All things, including the relationship that ended in grief, including the love that was given fully and not returned in kind, including the prayers that seemed to dissolve into silence without answer, including the nights that were long and the mornings that were hard and the months that passed in a kind of emotional slow motion, where nothing felt like it was moving forward. All of it, every last piece of it, is being woven together by hands that have not dropped the thread, by a love that has not looked away, by a God who promised that none of it would be wasted and who has never broken a promise. Living inside that truth during the actual experience of loss is not easy. It requires a kind of faith that does not come naturally to a human heart, because naturally, the heart wants to feel that things are okay before it trusts that they will be okay. It wants evidence before it extends belief. It wants the sun to be visible before it trusts that the sun still exists. But faith asks something different. Faith asks a person to carry the truth in their spirit even when the circumstances are telling a completely different story, even when the grief is still heavy, even when the healing feels impossibly far away, even when the unanswered prayers are still sitting in the silence, still waiting for something that has not yet come. And the remarkable thing about that kind of faith is that it does not require the pain to go away in order to be real. A person can be in genuine and significant pain and still trust God completely. Those two things are not contradictions of each other. They are simply both true at the same time. And the faith that is practiced in that place, the faith that is exercised not in the absence of suffering but in the middle of it, is a faith that produces something in the spirit. The easy season simply cannot. It builds a depth, a groundedness, a settled knowing that God is faithful that no amount of comfortable living can replicate. It becomes a part of the foundation, and foundations built in the hard seasons hold in ways that foundations built in the easy ones simply do not. The role of the enemy in certain relational seasons deserves to be named clearly, because there is a dimension of wrong relationship that goes beyond simple incompatibility or poor timing. So, relationships are not accidents. They are targeted. The enemy of the soul is not an indifferent force. He is strategic, intentional, and deeply familiar with the specific calling and purpose of every person who belongs to God. He knows what impact a life of faith and purpose can have. He knows the territories that will be shifted, the people that will be reached, the generational patterns that will be broken when a person fully steps into what God has designed them for. And if he can prevent that by getting the heart entangled in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong person, he will. This is why counterfeit love is crafted so carefully. It does not arrive wearing a sign that announces itself as a distraction. It arrives wearing chemistry and timing, and the particular quality of feeling that a lonely heart most desperately wants to feel. It arrives with intensity and momentum and a sense of inevitability that can feel, in the moment, almost like destiny. But there is a mark that distinguishes the counterfeit from the real, and that mark is the absence of peace. Real love, the kind that is designed by God for covenant and purpose, does not produce anxiety in the spirit. It does not leave a person perpetually off balance, perpetually uncertain of their standing, perpetually working to hold on to something that seems always just slightly out of reach. Real love settles the spirit. It establishes rather than unsettles. It carries a peace that is deep and stable and consistent, the kind of peace that does not fluctuate with the mood of the relationship or the behavior of the other person. The counterfeit produces urgency instead of peace. It produces an anxious kind of attachment that can feel like passion but is actually fear. It produces a constant low-level tension, a holding of breath, a monitoring of the other person's responses to gauge safety. And for a person who has lived with that kind of love, who has finally understood from the inside what it costs, the hunger for real peace becomes something they can articulate clearly. They stop mistaking the adrenaline of uncertainty for the depth of genuine connection. They stop confusing emotional chaos with intimacy. They begin to understand that the most profound evidence of love is not how intensely it makes the heart feel, it is how completely it allows the spirit to rest. Isaiah chapter 43 verse 2 holds a particular kind of comfort for a heart that has been through the kind of deep water that a significant loss produces. When passing through the waters, God says, "I will be with you." When crossing rivers, they will not sweep you away. When walking through fire, it will not burn. The language of that promise is deliberate. God does not promise to prevent the waters. He does not promise to remove the rivers before they must be crossed. He does not promise to eliminate the fire from the path. He promises presence in it. He promises that the water will not win. He promises that the flood, no matter how overwhelming it feels, does not have the final word. And for a person who has experienced a grief that felt like drowning, who has stood in a season that felt like everything was being consumed, that promise is not abstract theology. It is personal. It is lived. The water was entered. It felt unbearable, and they did not drown. They came through. Not unchanged, not unaffected, not the same person who went in, but through, still standing, still here, still held by the one who promised to hold them. There is a particular weight that comes with unanswered prayer, and it is different from ordinary grief in a way that matters. Because many people did not simply love someone and lose them without ever bringing God into it. Many people prayed. They interceded. They brought that relationship before God with everything they had, with fasting and with tears and with the kind of sincere, earnest believing that takes everything a person has to sustain. They laid the relationship at God's feet and asked Him to protect it, to heal it, to restore it. They believed with everything in them that God could intervene. And the answer was no, not silence but no. Not the absence of answer but the presence of a divine and deliberate no. And that no is one of the most difficult things a faithful heart can receive, because it does not just involve the loss of the person, it involves the wrestling with what the no means. Whether the prayer was insufficient, whether the faith was inadequate, whether something about the one praying made them unworthy of a yes. These questions are painful, and they are common, and they deserve to be met with honesty. The no was not a rejection of the one praying. It was not a verdict on their faith or their worth or their standing before God. It was the response of a God who could see what no human heart had the position to see. He could see the full arc of that relationship carried forward. He could see the cost it would exact, not just emotionally but spiritually, on the soul and the calling and the future of the person he loved. He could see the version of that person who arrived at the far end of that relationship, and he could see what they had surrendered along the way to get there. And his no was the most loving answer he could give. It was protection wearing the painful face of denial. It was mercy that did not feel like mercy until enough time had passed for the bigger picture to begin coming into focus. The day does come. For every heart that chooses to walk through the grief rather than around it, that chooses to bring the confusion and the pain to God rather than carrying it in isolation, the day does come when the no begins to resolve into clarity. When the bigger picture is visible enough that the protection becomes recognizable. When what felt like the worst thing that could have happened begins to look, in the context of everything that followed, like the very thing that made everything else possible. A heart that enters love from a place of desperation moves differently than a heart that enters love from a place of wholeness. This distinction matters enormously, and it is something the wilderness is uniquely designed to address. Desperation attaches quickly and releases slowly. It invests more than has been earned. It interprets ambiguous signals generously because the alternative is too painful to sit with. It tolerates what should not be tolerated, excuses what should not be excused, holds on long past the point where wisdom has already whispered that it is time to let go. Not because the person is weak, but because their internal emptiness is so significant that anything which temporarily relieves it feels like something that must be protected at almost any cost. God's design for love does not begin with two desperate people reaching toward each other hoping that together they will find what each of them is missing. His design begins with wholeness, with a person who has been filled in the deepest places not by a human relationship but by his own presence. A person who has learned in the wilderness, in the silent and sometimes aching season of being without the love they wanted, that God himself is enough, not as a consolation prize, not as a placeholder until the right person comes along, but genuinely actually, sustainably enough. A person who knows that from lived experience, who has tested it in the dark, who has come through the wilderness carrying the evidence of it in their spirit, that person enters love completely differently. They bring fullness, and the love that is built between two people who each bring fullness is a fundamentally different structure than the love built between two people who are each trying to get whole through each other. The right person, when they come, will feel different in a way that goes beneath the surface. Not perfect, because nothing human is perfect, and the expectation of perfection is its own kind of trap, but different in spirit. The right person will not produce anxiety. They will not require the monitoring and the breath-holding and the constant internal recalibration that the wrong relationship demanded. They will not make the question of worth feel perpetually open. They will not pull the heart away from God but will, simply by who they are and how they love, make the presence of God feel more accessible, more real, more woven into the fabric of daily life. They will call out what is best rather than exploit what is wounded. They will be drawn to the purpose rather than threatened by it, and the Spirit will know, not from a checklist, not from a comparison to the wrong person, but from the settled, unambiguous presence of peace. That love is being prepared, not as a reward for surviving the wrong relationship, though surviving it did something real and necessary in the spirit. It is being prepared because God's plan for his children includes love that reflects his own character, love that is patient and kind and selfless and honest and deeply rooted in something that does not shift with circumstances. And that plan has not been abandoned because the path to it included pain. The pain was part of the path. Every difficult and heartbreaking and grief-soaked step of it was moving towards something, building something, removing something that needed to be removed and establishing something that needed to be established. So the heartbreak is not cursed. The lesson is not despised. The time is not mourned as wasted, because none of it was wasted. Not a single prayer that was prayed over that relationship. Not a single tear that was shed after it ended. Not a single morning that began with grief and ended with a quiet whispered surrender that said, God, I do not understand this, but I trust you. All of it was seen. All of it was held. All of it was working. It was not rejection. It was redirection. It was not loss. It was love taking the longest, most tender, most thorough route toward wholeness. It was a chapter that had to be written exactly as it was, with all of its cost and all of its beauty and all of its pain, so that the person who came out the other side would be ready. Not perfect, not without remaining places of growth and continued healing, but ready in the ways that matter. Healed in the places that needed healing, grounded in the places that needed grounding, free from the patterns that would have undermined what was coming. Hungry not for just anyone, but for the specific quality of love that only God designs. The healing is not finished. The story is not finished. There are still chapters being written, still things being worked in the spirit, still ways that God is refining and preparing and establishing. Let Him do it. Let Him write the next part with His hands rather than with haste, or with fear, or with the old reaching from emptiness that the wilderness was designed to break. Because when His timing arrives, everything will make sense in the way that only God's timing can produce. Every heartbreak will resolve into purpose. Every unanswered prayer will reveal itself as a protected future. Every delay will show itself to have been the exact right pace. And the love that comes at the end of all of it will not just be beautiful, it will be evidence. Clear, personal, undeniable evidence of a God who was working in the silence and in the loss and in the wilderness, and in every moment that felt like nothing was happening. Working with perfect knowledge and perfect love toward exactly this, toward a heart that is whole, toward a love that is real, toward a future that reflects the faithfulness of the one who never stopped holding the story.